Welcome back to our continuing live coverage on CNN of George Zimmerman's second-degree murder trial, a trial that has this country transfixed. And believe it or not, countries around the world are tuning in to watch how this plays out for so many reasons other than just the crime itself. There's no secret that race has played a massive part of why this is so well known, this case. It is no secret that there are many who are for and against the process even happening here in Sanford, Florida. But no matter what you think about it, it is a case, it is a prosecution, there is a victim, and there is a man on trial who could spend many years behind bars if he's convicted for this. I want to take you to that man and his own words. He has not taken the stand. He may never take the stand. George Zimmerman has been watching this case play out from defense table and has been watching himself talking at length in interviews and on tape. Listen as he describes exactly how it is he got on top of Trayvon Martin after shooting him, and what he did with Trayvon Martin's arms.
Somehow I got out from under him, and when he was hitting me, I don't know what he was hitting me with. I thought he had something in his hands. So I grabbed his hands when I was on top of him, and I spread his hands away from his body because he was still talking, and I was on top of him.
So George Zimmerman says he got on top of Trayvon Martin after shooting him and thought there might have been something in his hands that he'd been hit with, so he wanted to spread those hands out. Here's the problem. When Trayvon Martin's body was found, those hands were underneath his body. But don't ask me. Ask the lead detective who actually came upon the scene, Chris Serino. Here's how he described it.
Do you recall that he then stated that Trayvon Martin somehow fell on the ground face first? You recall that?
Yes, sir.
And you recall a defendant stating that he put his arms out, correct? You
Correct.
recall him saying that?
Yes, sir.
Showing you State's Exhibit 77. Do you recall that he took some photographs out there?
Yes, I would. Yes.
And one of them was State's Exhibit 77?
Yes, sir.
And may I publish that to the jury, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
And you recall in that photograph the victim's hands being underneath his body?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Could someone say that that was inconsistent with the defendant's statements that his hands were straight out, that he had put his hands out?
That positioning, yes.
I'm sorry.
That positioning, as seen there, yes, it is.
In that interview that you conducted, or investigator Singleton conducted, the defendant didn't say, I put his hands out, and then after I put his hands out, I put him back in, did he?
No, he did not.
Yeah, someone's got some splaining to do. Mark NeJame, veteran criminal defense attorney in Florida. I say point for the prosecution on this one, unless there's a lot more I have to learn about how Trayvon Martin's hands, after being shot, went back under his body.
And that's exactly what the prosecutors attempted to do, is bring out inconsistencies and discrepancies to show that George Zimmerman's not been truthful. However, there's a big point for the defense on that, and that is that it does at least say that George Zimmerman was atop Trayvon Martin, which becomes consistent with all the other neighbors who said that when they looked out, they saw him on top.
But
so
if you're Mark O'Mara, under cross-examination, aren't you trying to elicit how on earth that those hands got back onto the body?
A major issue that the defense has to explain.
It hasn't been done. Did I miss it?
There are no other witnesses right now who've been able to say how those hands got underneath. And if you looked at Trayvon Martin's father in the courtroom, that was the most expressive. I've seen him throughout this. He rolled his eyes and shook his head downward. He knows he believes that is simply not true.
Hey, little known secret here. If the two of us did that in court, we could be thrown out. There's a sign going into court as you go through the magnetometer saying we will not tolerate facial expressions or noises in reaction to what you hear play in court. You're talking about family members. I think they get a little slack on that, and it wasn't very overt, but you could certainly see the emotion playing in his face. I have to squeeze in a quick break, but coming up, just what exactly we were talking about. Is there something else to come? Is there some other evidence, some other witness, some other forensics to explain how did Trayvon Martin's hands get back underneath his body if what George Zimmerman is saying is true? Back after this. Live continuing coverage on CNN of the Trayvon Martin almost versus George Zimmerman case. It is George Zimmerman who's facing second-degree murder charges in this courtroom. You're not missing any testimony. They're in a break in that courtroom. In fact, it's the Great Seal. It's the indication to the rest of the press, cameras off, mics off. we're in a break, but it gives us a great opportunity to show you what you may have missed. There was a key piece of testimony that happened just before those cameras trained on the Great Seal of the state of Florida, and it was the best friend, the self-described best friend of George Zimmerman, who spent all those hours after the killing of Trayvon Martin with George Zimmerman, hearing the entire account from the accused, hearing what he did, what he said, how he felt, how he looked. In fact, the injuries didn't need to speak. He saw those injuries for himself, and Mark Osterman just described those injuries in court, what he said his best friend George Zimmerman looked like just hours after the attack. Have a listen.
We get into my vehicle. Both Shelley and George got into the back seat. I had a four-door vehicle. They both got in the back seat, and Shelley is trying to put an assessment on the injuries that were to George's nose, the back of his head, and he had a swelling on his left side of his head. It was about the size of your fist. It was a swollen area, not really a goose egg, not as pronounced as that, but it was a very big swelling area.
Back with me live here in Sanford, Florida at the Criminal Justice Center in Seminole County is Mark NeJame. He's a veteran criminal defense attorney here in Florida. He's been watching this case since it began last February. When you hear that testimony and when you see those pictures that the jurors all have, by the way, they blew them up this big, and then they showed them all around court and described them and left them there for the jurors to see, those injured bruises and black eyes and injuries on the back of George Zimmerman's head. It's not lost that there is a guy who did get beaten up. No matter what, he got beaten up that night. And you can see on the evidence, these are right after the actual incident itself. His nose is bloody and swollen. The black eyes came the next day. The butterfly bandages on the back of the head came the next day. So you know that there was a fight. But then there's the affectation of this defendant. His friend has called him detached. Does detached play well for the prosecutor, or does detached somehow play well for the defense?
They're both going to spin it to their benefit, and that's just the way it plays. The depraved mind, the evil motive, the uncaring,
malice.
That's exactly what the state is going to attempt to bring out. The defense, on the other hand, is simply going to say he was stunned. It's not reasonable that somebody who's involved in that, in a shooting, and almost believing that, according to their testimony, they were almost killed, or they believe they were going to get killed.
Well, he had his head beat in.
Yeah, well, but the standard is that he's got to have a reasonable belief that he was fearing death or imminent injury that was going to be so substantial. So that's the standard. So he's got to go in there and say, look, I was involved in this horrific situation. Of course I can't remember everything chapter and verse. I can only remember the main parts, and that's what I did.
You're saying that the detached or the tunnel vision or however many different adjectives they want to ascribe to this could actually explain for any of these discrepancies. And again, they're minor discrepancies, but there are several of them. And I usually say strength in numbers. Is that how the defense would take this? Look, detached, yeah. You ever killed a guy? I think they actually asked Chris Domino that. You ever killed a guy? And Chris Serino, veteran detective, said no. Never used my service revolver and killed a guy.
And that's why the defense was asking his best friend, Osterman, on the stand, does somebody who's a former police officer or sheriff's deputy, said, does everybody remember everything? And he actually said, no. In fact, almost never do they remember everything. They focus on the key parts, and then the rest of it unfolds later.
Boy, oh boy, when I heard detached,
best friend. Remember, that's
when I heard
detached,
second-degree murder. Don't you have to have some kind of malice in there? And if you're detached after killing a teenager, that could really speak well to the prosecutor.
But remember, you're always going to, no matter what you do, if you cry, if you laugh, if you scream, if you jump up and down, if you're silent, there's always a spin. Because why? Everybody's different.
Everybody. Oh boy, are they? I've seen people mourn by partying. Honestly,
everybody's different.
Everybody mourns differently. Everybody behaves differently. Trial is coming back, so we've got our live eye on the courtroom, and you're not going to miss a moment of it. Just as soon as they start back up on that witness stand, swearing in their next witness. P.S. They're not telling us who the next witnesses are. Usually we get this nice big witness list. This time we get to stare at the Great Seal and wonder who's going to be next. In fact, we weren't even aware that Osterman was going to be taking the stand today, and Shazam, there he was. So it's always a big surprise and a bit of a mystery as to just exactly what the state strategy is. So you're going to find out along with us just as soon as it happens. So don't go away. It's going to resume soon. In the meantime, something big that's coming. Make no mistake and rest assured, forensics. It's CSI, folks. CSI Sanford that's going to play out in this courtroom, because the forensics will tell the story of the trajectory of the bullet and whether it is possible or plausible what George Zimmerman says. Is it all true? Coming up next. Welcome back to the Seminole County Criminal Justice Center. I'm Ashley Banfield, live in what can only be described as the hottest and muggiest day in Florida that I've witnessed in a long time. I feel like I'm in the central Amazon. Could be a hippopotamus in the backdrop any moment. Let me tell you something. If the jurors are on a lunch break, they're not coming outside. It is thundering. It's raining. The weather is inclement. It's been like this most middays throughout this hot, muggy, now July trial. But what's critical here is the lightning that's going on inside that courtroom. I want to go and do a whip around to my group who's analyzing this trial with me and watching this gavel to gavel. For starters, Danny Savalos, I'm going to ask you, if you look ahead to the next hour, what's the next Shazam moment? What's going to hit me over the head and make me think, I didn't see that coming?
It sounds like something I don't see coming either. Since we don't know who the witnesses are next, I don't know that we're going to get into forensics yet. I got to tell you, I think we're going to probably see the prosecution try to put on a little more fact evidence. But at this point, it's hard to say. For some reason, they've kept us in the dark. So I'd be really curious to see who they call next. But in terms of facts, not forensics, the prosecution has to be coming close to the end.
Okay, 20 seconds. Faith Jenkins, what's the Shazam moment to come?
I mean, they have to put on forensics here. They have to put on an examiner that's going to testify about what DNA, blood, if any, were on Trayvon's hands, where that evidence would be, also the trajectory of the bullet and how Trayvon, where the bullet went when he was struck by that bullet. So it's going to be very interesting testimony, but that's going to be key and essential for the prosecutor's case here.
Okay, Mark NeJame, you've tried a few cases in this state. You tell me what's coming. What am I going to be surprised to see?
You know, this prosecutor, I've got to tell you, he keeps on pulling rabbits out of somewhere. I'll call it a hat. The fact is that, you know, he ran a timeline. Now he's really working on that depravity issue. He knew he had issues with it. So if he has any other witnesses that can show malice, depravity of mind, anything along those lines, that's what's going to come next, because he's building that portion of his case. If, in fact, there is nobody else, then I think it's time to start getting into the forensics.
I am all about the forensics. I'm going to be the first to tell you I watch CSI. I watch live trials to find out just exactly what the molecular smoking gun tells me. That said, guess who handles the molecular smoking gun? People. And we are fallible, folks. Hey, thanks for watching, everybody. As we continue to keep our live eye on this trial, you're not going to miss a moment of the live testimony, because we've got our live cameras, we've got a crew inside the courtroom, we've got several crews outside the courtroom, and we are watching that seal to see when that shot widens out to a full shot to see who the next person who's going to walk through that door is, because that's the way we find out. The mystery continues. The live coverage of the Zimmerman case from here in Sanford, Florida continues. I'm Ashley Banfield. We'll see you soon.